All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the only coast to coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis. Your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, and I am so excited to have an all-star cast today. We've got the Malcolm Chisholm, who's got the receipts on LinkedIn promotions. We've got the data whisperer, Scott Taylor of Meta Consulting. He's amazing. And last but not least, we have Kate Strachan, dedicated. She knows where you live. She knows where your data lives. She will find you. I suggest you not make her unhappy. Unhappy. That's what my Russian boss used to always say about the people who he had stiffed on bills. They're unhappy. That was his favorite term. We're talking all things data today. It's going to be a fantastic show. And let's not waste any time. I saw this hilarious quote from one of my favorite people in the business, Steve Lucas. He said, data is the new sand. I thought that was hysterical because everyone talks about data is the new oil. You have to refine it. It doesn't have value to refine. Oh, okay, we know all that. But data is the new sand. It's like just gritty, gets on your shoes, winds up in your car. You can't ever vacuum it all the way out. It's just forever with you, little tiny bits of sand. But it makes sense because if you refine it, you can, if you have a glass blower, for example, maybe you can do something with that sand. But let's throw it over to Kate Strachan of Dedicated. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you think about the importance of data.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show. Hello, everybody. I'm Kate Strachan. I can't do the accent as good as Eric can for Russia. But I am the founder of Dedicated. It's a media company that's focused on helping data analytics, machine learning, and AI companies reach their audience on LinkedIn. I help out with brand awareness. I've got my own show called Dedicated on Air, which is why I love Eric's background that says on air, reminds me of my show as well. And Eric, I wanted to point out when you were talking about sand, for some reason I started thinking of how data is the new water, because I've heard of that, right? All the pipelines and cleaning the water and making sure it all makes sense. Then I thought of mixing sand and water, but then I remembered that I recently put together a video where I actually built a sandcastle to demonstrate the importance of data infrastructure. It was for one of my clients. They wanted to talk about how if you build on poor infrastructure, then all your apps go to crap, basically, and it just doesn't work well. And so I built like a really bad sandcastle, and then I scrapped it and built a much better one. I had so much fun, and my kids are like, "You get to do this for work?" And I'm like, "Yeah, this is what I do for a living." And I explained it to my family. My brother's like, "I still don't know what you do," and I'm like, "Well, I got paid to make a sandcastle today." And he's like, "Can you just keep making them?" And I'm like, "No, it doesn't work that way. It's all about the concept." But yeah, data. I think data is extremely important. I think your question was what I think about data. Data is literally my life. I even have a license plate on my car that literally just says data, which
Nice.
gets a lot of attention from passerbys because they start asking like, why do you like data so much? So it's been fun.
That's good stuff. And of course, you help people get the word out about their own personal brands. So you're passionate about brand. You've done a fine job branding yourself, by the way, Dedicated. I mean, come on, that's good stuff, right? Dedicated. That's
Yes,
pretty
thank
impressive.
you. Thank you.
And
Yeah,
how did
I
you?
love talking about personal branding. I've got a course out on LinkedIn Learning on that topic as well, where people, I think it's like a 45-minute course of everything I know about personal branding. I compacted it really, really tight into a very short course. But yeah, I think personal brand is extremely important in any area of data management, data analytics, data science, now AI, right? It's all about standing out, especially with AI sort of doing all of our work for us. A lot of times, the more personal touch we can put on our work, the better.
That's interesting. And you had mentioned before the show that we'd be remiss were we to not mention generative AI. So you've now hinted at generative AI. And I think the key to success with Gen AI is going to be, wait for it, data, right? Your good quality data. In fact, let me throw this at you and see what you think. I believe that AI, and in particular large language models, represent a second chance for data. And what I mean by that is the first chance we did data warehousing and analytics and business intelligence and visualization, all that stuff. We moved it around. We used master data management to try to reconcile systems. We've done all these different things, essentially torturing the data to make it say what we want it to say. But it's been very expensive. There has been certainly value for that. But I think that this inflection point we're at right now is not small. I think this is a very significant transformation, and that AI will give a second chance to data, by which I mean if you feed your AI model, your corporate AI model, and I think every big company is going to have one, with the most trusted, carefully curated data, you're going to get a very good result. And if you don't, you're just going to get some rando nonsense. What do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna say it gives it a second chance, and hopefully companies and people take the second chance to feed it clean data and don't lose focus and don't just focus on, oh, look what we can do with AI now. I think going back to data management and its importance and making sure that you focus on data quality and data governance, and then that you're feeding this large language model good cookies, not crappy cookies, not junk food, and making sure you actually clean it all up. Going back to the sandcastle analogy, if I used sand with twigs and random stuff and wrappers and cigarette butts in there, the sandcastle wouldn't be pretty. It wouldn't hold up well, versus if I used high quality sand. So sand and data could be a thing, actually. You got me thinking.
I like that. I like that. And sand doesn't need any branding. I think everyone knows what sand is. We've all walked on the beach. But to the point of my one buddy on the LinkedIn platform, he said you can create beautiful artwork with sand if you are very careful about what you're doing to it. But again, like with data, it has to have purpose. It has to have context. I think part of the challenge here, and I'll throw this at you, and then I'll maybe bring in the data whisperer to comment on it. But you think about the old days of data warehousing and how old habits die hard. And you had to strip out a lot of context in order to get the little bits of transactional data through thin pipes to slow processors and expensive storage. Well, now the pipes are fat, the processors are blazing speed, you can parallelize them, storage is cheap. So everything has changed in terms of the data game, which is big, is why we went to the data lake. But again, we thought, oh, we're going to put it all in one place, which is probably a bad idea. I think data should live where it is best used and accessed as needed. But what do you think about this evolution and how old habits die hard? How do you get your clients to make those old habits die?
Yeah, I think we're still evolving, and I think we are moving in the right direction. And the closer we can get to keeping that business context of that data as we allow access to the data is extremely important. So I'm all about, data literacy, data accessibility, data democratization, making sure people have the right access. But I think with the change in the progress in data warehousing and cloud, now we make it easier for people to actually access not just the data, but data in the right context for the right individual with personalization. So I think we're definitely moving in that right direction.
That's good. And last thing I'll throw at you, can you define data mesh?
Data mesh, no.
Good answer. Nietzsche is what you have to say about
Nie
that.
могу.
My dog upstairs is trying to define data right now, and he's not very happy about it. I have two German shepherds, and of course they chose this moment to chime in because
We don't
they're
hear
trying to
them at
figure
all.
out what data mesh is all about as well. Well, let's hand it over to Scott Taylor, the proverbial data whisperer of Meta. And you've been talking about data and the business value of data for a long time. And the deal with data mesh is you want the business groups to govern their own data to help with that process. But tell us a bit about your thoughts and the value of data.
On the data mesh, you hear about the data mesh, you hear about the data fabric. Eric, I ask you, what about the data Spanx? Help kind of the data Spanx.
Thanks, like the clothing.
Tighten that integration. Scott Taylor, the data whisperer here. I help people calm data down. That's what data whispering is all about. I'm 30 something years in the data management space, and now I'm just a content creator, part of Kate's posse of the Data Avengers as well, out there trying to get people excited and fired up about the data management part of the space. You're talking about feeding stuff into, data second chance. That's a nice way to put it. But aren't we just talking about the same thing we've always talked about? Garbage in, garbage out. You put the bad data into LLMs, you get hallucinations. So put garbage into Gen AI, you can get garbage out at scale now, which is really wonderful benefit.
And actually, so one of my good buddies, Eugene Burke, who's been on the show a few times, Digital Strategies Group, we're doing a bit of a stealth project now. He had the greatest line, I think, about this limitation of large language models. He said they don't have an epistemological barrier, which means for non-philosophers out there, they don't know what they don't know. And it reminds me, I won't say which country, but there are certain countries where I was told, don't ask people on the street for directions because they'll be too embarrassed and they'll just tell you something even if they don't know. And that's kind of like what these large language models do. If you don't have a good embedding strategy, if you don't populate either a vector database or your own model itself with enough curated data, and if you don't train it properly, then guess what? It's just going to make things up. Like when it said, I've written 3 books, and I was like, are you seeing the future? So you're right that we need to curate carefully, but that's always been the mission.
It's always
right?
been
It's
the
not-
case. There's nothing new about that. There's nothing new about the need for well-structured, expertly stewarded, wonderfully governed data that, you're going to bring Malcolm on here. It's got metadata, it's got master data, it's got reference data, MDM, RDM, RIM, PIM, DAM, all these foundational activities that enterprises must commit to if they want to leverage data across their organization. And what enterprise doesn't want to leverage data across their organization? So these are the same principles we've been dealing with. We got to shine them up. We got to rephrase them a little bit to get people's attention. But it's just maddening sitting in the data space for so many decades. Again, I go back pre-2K, seeing the same story over and over again with different characters.
Well, I think part of the challenge is that you have this long tail of legacy software and hardware and mindset, by the way, and it's very difficult. So when new technologies come in, you try to move over to the new technology, but you still have this long tail of legacy to contend with. And in fact, we wanted to promote the Data Universe conference. It is coming April 10th and 11th to New York to the Javits Center, which I'm
To the
told
Javits
Malcolm
Center.
Chisholm does not like. He's not a fan of the Javits Center. We'll find that out in the next segment.
Well, I'll be there. Kate will be there. We'll let
I
Malcolm
know.
decide whether he wants to be there or not, given his
It's going to be a party.
his feeling about that location. But I think it's going to be a blast. Yeah.
Well,
So
well, I wrote it. I wrote an abstract. I don't know if it'll get approved or not yet, but it said the fourth word is in parentheses. Forever in your technical debt. It's what I wrote about,
Oh,
and it's pretty cute. Kate laughs, so she likes it. The headline basically leads into the abstract, which says something like, "What's the definition of a legacy system?" And the answer is any system in production. The joke is that the moment you drive off the lot, you are accruing technical debt. Like literally, the second you leave the lot, technical debt is like bearing down.
that's a good way to think about it. Yes.
Well, you look at like doctors' offices. I mean, they still want me to fill out pieces of paper on a notepad. I'm like, are you kidding me? I have to write my name 7 times. Like, can you just, could you just give me the iPad? And then they give you the iPad and it's like 875 questions. It's like, do you people know anything about surveys? Like when you get to question 521, the quality of the answer goes way down because no one wants to write that stuff.
Right.
But we can port that to the data world and say, ask just enough questions to get just what you need and move on. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah. It's just, I hate that at doctor's offices as well, filling it in over and over again. It's like, haven't they kept anything? Don't they have any legacy data about me?
Yeah, they do. It's in a folder that they put in the filing cabinet in the back there somewhere. I hear you have some interesting folders too, including folders on strategy.
Me, I have folders. Yes, I've got all kinds of interesting stuff here. Do you want to talk about the puppets yet, or you want to bring Malcolm on first?
Let's bring in a puppet real quick. Show your puppets, just so we can see them. I think they're
This
adorable.
is about my character, the CDO, the Chief Dog Officer,
Nice.
and he partners up with. If you haven't seen the data puppets on YouTube, you got to see them out there. There's a preview out there. Journey to the center of the single version of the truth.
Nice.
The greatest data story ever told, starring the CDO, the Chief Dog Officer, and also appearing the CEO,
That's
the Chief
me.
Elephant Officer, played by Kate. There's a CMO. Guess what he is? A mouse. A CFO is a fish. I mean, this stuff writes itself. How has nobody else come up with that before? They hire a cat sultant from Meow Kinsey, who borrows their watch to tell them what time it is.
Borrows their watch.
We've got a whole crowd of business users who'll be out there trying to deal
That's
with the
nice.
data. But take a look at that. It's crazy stuff. I'm having a ball. This is what I'm doing now.
That's nice.
Data
That's nice.
puppets, events, the funnest possible stuff. And similar to Kate, if you can get paid for making sandcastles or
That's
doing
good.
puppets, then Welcome
good.
to our world.
You gave me a segue to bring in a fantastic lyric by Coy Leroy, or Coy Leray, I think her name is. She says, "Time is money, so I spent it on a watch. Hold on." It's like, what? That's pretty clever. And that's the semantic side of the equation. We do want words to go along with all these numbers. I mean, the numbers obviously are the transactions and how many widgets we're selling and so on and so forth, or clicks and all this kind of fun stuff. But the words are the semantics. That's probably going to be a good segue to bring Malcolm Chisholm into the second segment here. But maybe we'll just finish up with Scott. And maybe I'll go ahead and throw a curveball and bring Strachny back into conversation. Kate Strachny, what do you think about puppets? Why you play with games with puppets with your data?
What's the question? Your accent is very difficult, Eric.
She doesn't take puppet questions, just so you know.
He doesn't. I'm not allowed to speak about puppets per our contract with Scott. That's his thing. We can't.
That's my area.
All right, this is.
But I did want to. I had a comment when you were talking about the doctor's office and the iPad. So they do have iPads now, or they send you a link on your phone. But the worst, most annoying part is when you have to fill out, let's say I recently had an appointment for my kid's doctor checkup, and they ask for the kid's date of birth at least 8 times on 8 different, within one form. Like, I filled it out. You don't have the systems to just, why? It's so confusing.
It's a data model issue. It's a systems integration issue. It's a data model, right? I mean, I remember with some of the smart people online, they figured out, hey, if we have someone enter the zip code, we can dynamically look up the town that they're in. I'm like, oh, who's thinking, huh? Who's thinking? Put the zip code there. It's like the people like USAA figured this out. You call in and they say, I see you're dialing from a number in our system. If that's the phone you usually use, press 1. Like, yes, that's right. Now you know who I am. Don't have to tell 5 people in a row, this is Eric Kavanaugh. I'm calling about this.
Oh, yes.
Right, that's so called enterprise integration. That's from that's like 22 years ago. Enterprise integration. We've come a long way, but data is front and center, I suppose. Data should lead the charge. Let the data talk to you. Let the data tell you what's going on. I mean, that's a standard thing to say in our industry. But folks, we're just going to have a lot of fun here on our show today, talking to, of course, Kate Strachny of Datacated. I'll never be able to say your name normally, just so you know, because I now know, and you laughed. So come on. The guy gets a girl to laugh. Just keep saying that stuff. Keep her laughing. That's the joke.
I'm going to have you introduce me at like conferences now, so you can say my last name.
In fact, to bring Homer Simpson back into it, one time on an episode, he got Marge mad, and then he made her laugh. He goes, ha ha, I made you laugh. I win. He walked away. Oh, we're not all that bad. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You are listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, take us to the future indeed. Here on Inside Analysis, talking to an all-star cast, Scott Taylor, the data whisperer, Kate Strachny of Datacated. And next up, one of my favorite people in the business. He's just rocking and rolling on the LinkedIn platform these days with thought-provoking posts about receipts. He has all the receipts, and he knows about the metadata on the receipt. One, Malcolm Chisholm of Data Millennium. Welcome back to DM Radio. Tell us about the receipts post that got 300,000 views.
Thank you, sir. Well, that was, something I always wanted to do, which was, how do you bring home data to people and the different types of data? Well, do data analysis of a receipt. We all deal with receipts. We just normally throw them away or even refuse to accept them. But if you look at them, there's a lot of data on it. And some of it, I don't know what it means, quite frankly. It's all encoded, but a lot of it you can make out, and then you can classify it. It's metadata, it's transaction data, it's master data, it's reference data, and it's useful tool for teaching people about data. I didn't think it would go very far, but it like took off and went viral, which is quite bizarre. And it's still going strong out there in the LinkedIn sphere. So there you go.
It gave me hope that stuff actually can go viral, because I've learned some hard lessons over the years that a lot of what goes viral was paid to go viral, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I don't think you paid any money to promote that, right? That was
no. I paid no money. Except for the lettuce and whatever else was I bought. It cost me about $6, something like that, to get the receipt. So, you know, at the local supermarket, and the folks of the supermarket were very happy because it served as 300,000 views of unpaid advertising for them too.
Yeah.
So there you go.
But I thought it was very clever because you were looking at the receipt and you pointed out, here's metadata about the product, here's metadata about the SKU. All this information is very important information, which is a window into the operational system that is actually generating the receipt, right?
Right, and all systems, it's a composite that's all ending up in the receipt of all this data. So you can think about, you would have to have different systems to handle different bits of it, but they're all coming together there. So it's a view of data, you know, and something, you know, quite common, but it's shows the importance of data.
Yeah, and trying to understand where things come from. The thing I like about it is that it is a reflection of what is coming from the inside. There are all these systems that are tracking the price of products, of course, the date and things of this nature. If you have your magic code or your, you know, your rewards number, for example,
Yeah.
I'm like Bill Burr. I don't really trust the rewards programs. They're always changing their minds and pulling the string on things. But there is some value in all that stuff, and it allows you to kind of see what's inside. You know, I remember years and years ago, I worked on a project where we connected to Fannie Mae's desktop underwriting system. We were the first company ever to do that. And I remember that the developer was having a hard time. And I thought to myself, you know, in the office, they use a system, a desktop underwriter, it's an application. And if I just did something like, you know, print to PDF or something, I think PDFs were around back then, but it's year 2000. I was like, look, let's just print out what it needs. And those would be the fields you would look to capture through this web form. So it's like, how the hell hard is that? It's just a data stream. Now you have to securely connect to something, but in terms of the data itself, and that's what we did, and it freaking worked. I'm like, well, duh. Why don't you pay me $1,000 an hour?
Or more. And just for those that don't know, Desktop Underwriter is a way to get mortgage applications approved so that the government will securitize them and put them into mortgage-backed securities. So it's a pretty important part of our economy, actually. So, yeah, that's a big deal. So, you know, if you own a house, you've probably been through it, and even if you don't know.
Yeah, it's painful. I remember the collateralized debt obligations and what was Buffett's comment? Don't believe geeks spearing formulas or something like that. It's like, watch out for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those were the days.
Yeah, but the important thing is the data that's in these systems. And I'm curious to know your thoughts. You've been around for a number of years here and have seen highs and lows and movements like Hadoop coming along, everyone getting excited. And now, of course, AI. But to our point earlier, AI is not going to do you much good if you don't have really high quality data, right?
Yeah, I mean, talking about the historical aspect, I always thought, you know, the slogan of IT ought to be, we build the legacy systems of the future, you know, so that people truly understand the value that they add. That said, I mean, okay, AI, data is going to be important, but it's a different take on it. It's going to, because these things work off of sentence form, you're going to have to get it. It's much more about getting unstructured data, as we would call it, into a shape that you can push through in data preparation into the you know, AI black hole basically. And that data preparation, having looked into it, is an enormous number of steps. There's all kinds of things you've got to do. And there's things that AI doesn't do in terms of normal data management practices, like data retention. You forget about it. Once it goes in, that's it. It's not, you know, it's like Las Vegas. It comes out again, but I mean, you can't make it forget. There's no forgetting mechanism. So if you put something in like PII, it's not like you can scrub it. There's no bleach for AI, so that's a problem. But this enormous set of steps to break up things into maybe propositional format, yes, it'll read some structural data, but mostly it's getting it into that format. And then on the other side of it, it's not like the thing in Star Trek where you ask it anything and it'll just tell you whatever, and it'll be like this super brain. it's going to have to be coupled to use cases, and those use cases are going to have to be expressed as prompts. So you've got these prompt libraries that'll turn, the gibberish question that Malcolm asks the AI into the closest prompt and give it the answer associated with that prompt. So you get the question answer pair. So all of that is a huge amount of data management, data preparation, and you better get it right, because what I have found in the past, maybe this doesn't apply to AI, but with documentation, is that as soon as somebody finds a bit of documentation they don't trust, like 1%, or some threshold like that, they don't trust any of it. Okay.
Mhm.
So if you get garbage answers out of AI, then it's going to make people think again, although they probably, people today are probably conditioned to think that AI is, going to solve all their problems. So maybe be a bit more generous with it than documentation. But they won't, they'll come to a point where they don't trust any of it if this isn't done correctly.
Right. Well, that is actually a pretty interesting point, and there is a trust issue that we're going to have to get around. And there's also a mathematical issue, because as I understand it, what these models have done is, first of all, they vectorize, by which they mean they take words and turn them into numbers and into arrays of numbers, and then they're doing statistical analysis on the numbers. And then when you sort of decode it on the other end, it turns it from numbers back into letters. So you do have this very interesting transformation. Like, it reminds me of ASCII. Remember ASCII? Or it switches from letters and sentences and paragraphs and so forth to numeric values and then back. So the thing that kind of strikes me is the other shoe to drop here is going to be the cost of this stuff. Now, right now, there are
Yeah.
billions of dollars going in by Microsoft and Google and other guys to train these things, and companies are all going to want to train their own models. But I don't think we really have any idea what the actual cost is going to be to the user, and I think that's going to be another shoe to drop. But what do you think, Malcolm?
Well, right. I mean, I think that it'll depends on the apps that are made from them. So, I'm looking to this right now because I don't want to use one of the hosted ones, because why should I give it my intellectual property? So I'll get one of the ones I can have on-prem. Well, that's going to cost me about $5,000 to buy the equipment, just to be able to run the base version of one of these.
Mm-hmm.
But then I could do things like, create something around a curated set of knowledge where people would understand. It would do that and give you answers to that. But I think a more interesting set of use cases to me is knowledge integration. So, we talk about data integration, like, we talk about MDM, like integrating customer data earlier. Okay. But we've got knowledge as well. So I could theoretically think about nobody likes being a data steward, so let's have an AI one. So this AI data steward is told who looks after these reference data tables, these code tables, and then it's also, let's say, coupled to the HR system, and it recognizes the feed from the HR system. So it says, okay, Eric or Malcolm is the data steward for the country codes. Okay, that's good to know. And then Malcolm gets fired because he's useless and is replaced by Eric, but that's an announcement from HR. Now, today, you'd have to go into a data catalog and manually, some poor schmuck's data steward has to update it. But now we can integrate these various unstructured data sources, and it'll realize who is the true data steward of the country codes. So we've got that as a possibility. You get all this integration of knowledge, which is something a little bit different to the structured data integration we see. So that's a good one. And having these, data steward bots, really, agents out there doing this work for us, so that we don't have to do all this donkey work, which nobody wants to do. We keep telling them they have to do it. No, they don't want to do it. So, and I don't blame them. So there's a lot of promise there too, if we can get this to work properly.
Well, and let me throw this curveball at you, and then I'll bring in the other guest and throw it at them as well, or some variation of it. It may be a hard slider. When I think about the power of these models to, upon prompt, grab information from all these different sources and fuse it together to give you some narrative, which is what they're doing. I wonder to myself, think about all of the heavy lifting that's done, even still today, for data warehousing: extract, transform, load, extract, load, transform, all these batch windows, which in large organizations are in the hundreds, if not thousands. And you have to know that it's not all change data capture. There's just a lot of bulk movement of data, picking it up, forklifting it over here, pick it back up again, forklift it over there. I think that's going to be looked at as a tremendous waste of time in the new world. But the
I,
key is, can these models short circuit all that and just get me the answer I want somewhat reliably, so I don't have to move all that stuff around anymore? What do you think?
I think you're onto something there. I think that one of the impetuses, if you look at where these the AI projects are coming from, is to get rid of coders, get rid of data engineers. Don't need them anymore. We don't want them. They're a huge expense. So could we replace them? So you've got, Copilot and things like that. You've got assistants to generate code, but why not let it do the code generation if you could just show it the data? Okay, and do exactly what you're saying. I mean, how complicated is it? I mean,
Right.
ETL is, the ETL products are, or traditionally have been, a replacement for the more expensive kind of programmer. This is just taking that evolution a step further. So then, if you could just get rid of the, legions and legions of coders that are out there, it's not good for them, but and replace them with some skilled people who are driving this and who constrain the AI and let it generate the code based on what it's seeing in the data. That would be a massive efficiency gain in the economy.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I mean, I asked myself, we have a show planned next year, what's not in the crosshairs of this stuff? And the fact is, we have lots and lots of legacy processes, legacy mindsets, legacy systems. But so just give you one example real quick before the break. Think about MRI scans. My wife, who has to deal with MS, which is a real pain, she has to go get these MRIs every once in a while. Those files are massive. I mean, you can fit them on a CD-ROM, but it's a huge file. If you vectorize something like that, number one, it's a form of compression, but number two, it facilitates statistical analysis. So isn't that a use case for vectorization, to vectorize graphic images, big ones, into numbers, which is much smaller and allows statistical analysis? What do you think?
Well, I think I think you're right, but I think we're part of the way there already with the image processing for features that we have that are available in current libraries, which are pre-AI. So a lot of that can be done already. I've seen it done. Building data pipelines to do just that. Like, has this tumor progressed, regressed, whatever. So we've got a lot of that. So that would be, take it a step further. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, what isn't in the crosshairs of these new technologies, and I think also
you're in the crosshairs. We could have an AI illusion of a host who could ask the questions.
Yeah.
You can get Gen AI to give you questions, and you couple that with one of the the video generator thingies that they have, and there you go. You got a new personality.
Yeah, I think in terms of its storytelling, it's still pretty formulaic, but it's, you have to figure it's learning. It's going to learn. It's going to get better and better at these things, and you're going to have your choices.
Maybe it'll plateau.
Yeah, hopefully. We'll see. Well, don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You are listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking all about all things data. Time to refine. You have to refine the data to get value from it, just like oil, just like water. I heard the water analogy at a conference this past week. A guy was joking, we're all thirsty. Look at the oceans, they're huge, but you can't drink that water. You got to desalinate it. You got to clean it out. You got to get the fishes out of there. You got to get all kind of fun stuff out of there. So we understand that. refined data. But I'll throw it over to Kate Stretch of Datacated to share with us her thoughts on best practices going forward. We have a second chance for data. I think our audience has agreed with me on that. What's your advice for companies to build their own AI model with refined data? How do you get that process started?
Yeah, when you said best practices, I was actually going to take it into the direction of data privacy, because something Malcolm shared earlier when he was talking about receipts reminded me of a story I had from a couple of months ago. I went clothes shopping. So raise your hand if you've been clothes shopping in the past few months, right? In store, not online. And I think we share so much information online that when I don't really do in-store shopping, but when I got there, they said, do you want to put your email or phone number into the system? Literally every store. And I'm like, no, I don't want to put my information in. I just don't like it. I don't like all the spam. It was fine. And then I get to one store, I'm not going to name and shame them, but they're like, okay, do you want a receipt? After our whole back and forth of, are you sure you don't want to sign up? I'm like, yes, I'm sure. Fine. Okay, so they're like, okay, so in order to get a receipt, you're going to need to give us a phone number or an email address. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I won't get a receipt then. And so they come back and they're like, well, you can't return your stuff without a receipt. And these were shoes for my kids. So I'm like, okay, well, if they don't fit, I'm gonna have to come back. So they sort of put me in this position where I won't be able to return it, but they're sort of forcing me into sharing my data. And when you were talking about receipts, Malcolm, that was all I could think about. I'm like, yeah, we have all this information that they're collecting, but sometimes I just didn't want that to happen. I ended up not getting my receipt. But I think one of the best practices that I can think of for organizations and data is making sure that the people they're taking data from feel comfortable enough sharing that and sort of allowing them to opt out of that process if that's something that they want to do.
Well, you bring up a very interesting point, which is getting forced into using a certain system.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is the dark side of digital transformation. I went to a hotel in Austin, Texas last October, and there was no one at the desk. There was no one to talk to give me my keys or anything. It was all this online process of using your phone, and I had to show it a picture of my driver's license so it captured that. I'm like, how Orwellian is this weird situation? And it was a real pain in the rear. I'm not going to lie. It was like, you really can't afford to have one person sitting there and get paid $20 an hour to take information. That's how far we're going to go. Or, and I'll throw it over to you, Kate, and then we'll get the other gentleman in on this. The McDonald's kiosks where they want you to go and find your food. Look, if you just do the garden variety something, okay. But if you have special orders, it's like, oh my God, hold on. This menu over to that menu and this other. Now, wait, which I lost it. It's just a total nightmare. There are some things that should not be digitally transformed. Real quick, Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, so real quick, I'll tell you, I think there are preferences. Some people, probably about half the population, would want to avoid eye contact and people.
Yeah, right.
And they would love it. So I think just providing the option for someone like you who wants that social interaction of here, you check my ID, I don't want to scan this.
Right.
And then I think just long story short, have both options, because I know that could speed things up if there's a really long line and you've got that one person who just maybe is new and doesn't know what they're doing, or one system crashes, you have all these other options of people doing it themselves. But I personally, if I'm going to do food shopping, I'm not going to do the self-checkout when I see, even if there's a line. Why? There are people right there who are going to do it for you, where my mom would insist on self-checkout, even if it's a cart full of stuff. I'm like, you might as well work here now. You're doing it all. So there should be at least a discount for that service.
Yeah, Bill Burr makes that exact joke. He's like, why don't I just check it out myself and I get a discount, or what's going on? I work
Yeah, exactly.
I realize, when did I sign it? Do I have a health insurance plan? What's going on here? Oh, why am I working for you? Well, Scott Taylor, I'm sure you don't mind hitting all the different buttons in the menus.
I don't mind that. I guess my big question is, based on the conversation we just had, Kate, did the shoes fit your kids?
Yes, the shoes fit. I did not have to return, but I'm not going back to that store.
Phew. Okay. That's good.
Well, it's like radio.
I had the opposite experience recently at a Panera where they had a bunch of things on the menu, and I was sitting there going, I have to ask these people what's in this salad, 3 different salads. And they had a kiosk, and they had the nutrition information, and they listed every single item that was in there. I was like, all right, that's a lot easier. So Yes, if you have a choice, but sometimes you feel like, not because I don't want to have eye contact with somebody, but it just might be a smoother experience to go this way rather than that way. So, as much as these things can augment our existence, that's good. But when it starts to replace it as an either or that ridiculous story you're talking about, Kate, of demanding certain data, otherwise you don't get proof of the transaction we just had,
I
that's
wonder if that's even legal.
crazy. That's
I was wondering
crazy.
if it's legal as well, because
Yeah.
like what the hell?
It
Maybe
probably
in
isn't.
the future. I don't know.
But if you spend some time and you're not from Russia, you're from Tajikistan, I guess. So it's not the
I mean,
same. But
they'll
yeah,
probably just say don't shop here if you don't like it, right? But I don't know.
Don't shop here if we can't get your data.
Yeah, pretty much.
that's pretty strange. Well, Malcolm, I'll throw it over to you for
Yeah,
some.
I
Go
I
ahead.
would try out my favorite Soviet rule, which is the rules are there to be avoided. And you want my email? Okay, it's aaa@gmail.com. Okay, so I'll just lie, or
No,
give you.
we just said you were the most honest man a moment ago. You've upset the apple
But
cart
then,
here.
no.
Breaking now. You heard it here first. You just ripped it wide open.
No. In this kind of ethical dilemma, you're forcing me to do something against my will. So this is what you're going to get. Okay.
Well, but Malcolm, then you won't get the receipt, which was the
they
point.
wouldn't give you they wouldn't print it out
it.
and give it to you even then.
They
No,
wouldn't
great.
print. Yeah, they don't have a
So
printer.
only email. Okay. Well, in
Yes.
that case, what we're
So-
building up is
Oh.
a single point of failure.
Yeah.
So this is like when they had the Colonial Pipeline ransomware a couple of years back, where they said, well, okay, the system's screwed up. Well, why don't you go back to managing this pipeline, the mechanical way that you used to do it, because it's quite old. And the guy said, well, everybody who knew how to do that is either dead or retired. And so, we are, you can't read maps. You don't want to make eye contact with anybody or talk to anybody. Okay, this is okay until something happens with this great shaky edifice of technology that makes our lives easier in the sense that we don't have to think very much or engage in too much physical labor anymore. Yeah, but what happens when you need to?
Yeah.
So you got no backup. You're making your civilization extremely vulnerable. So we will see.
Well, we were talking about in the break, right? So you have Gen AI create the questions for an interview, then you have Gen AI create the answers for the interview, then you have it watch the show and generate a summary. Do we need
I bet you there
people
are bots
as part
that
of the
are being-
show there?
I
anymore?
guarantee there are bots that are counted as visitors, as viewers to my
That's
website.
true.
Look at all these viewers I have.
Yeah, I had an experience. I don't know, but I was contacted over LinkedIn it was a legitimate company, but I'm pretty sure it was a bot that was texting me on LinkedIn messages, and then another bot on email. And I think we ought to at least have transparency. Say, hi, I'm a bot. I'm emailing you on behalf of,
Right.
blah 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 company. There is no transparency. It's like I had to go through this LinkedIn certification where I did have to do facial recognition stuff to get LinkedIn to believe I was a human. Whereas no bot has to declare themselves to be a bot on LinkedIn and doesn't have to prove that they're not. But I had to prove I wasn't. I had to prove I was human. So that kind of irked me.
Is that
Yeah,
is there a
that's-
need for like a reverse Turing test?
I think
Yeah.
that you're onto something though, because
I-
you get these phone calls too, like, "Hi, it's Cindy. I'm calling you about the new online program." Blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, I'm sure there was a Cindy who recorded that at some point in time, but you are not on the phone. They
No,
even get
no, there's not even a Cindy. It's totally generated.
Probably true.
Oh, that's just bizarre. I think
I
that
like
we
opening
are-
up one chat bot and then getting into a conversation with the other chat bot. So you get two chat bots talking to each other
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
still don't get your order through. But it's fun. It's, plenty
Well,
of
at a
time on my
certain
hands
point-
in between puppet takes.
Yeah, at a certain point, customer service does come into play, and you will remember, as Kate will, not to go to that store anymore. But I have to shout out to old Radio Shack, because in the 1980s, Radio Shack had the foresight to ask you for information. They had a little form you'd fill out when you bought your batteries or whatever it was. It was actually very annoying. But in retrospect, I was like, wow, they were very forward looking. But
Mm.
They weren't.
There
fools
was a
that got the
comedian who
job.
did a bit during that time about having to give because they were really militant about getting
They
your
were.
phone number.
They weren't. I remember this.
And you need
Yeah.
your phone number to buy
It
batteries.
was a corporate dictate.
Yeah.
You got
How's Radio
people
Shack
get their
doing these
data.
days, by the way? So
Well, folks, you've been listening to the only coast to coast radio show here in America about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis. Talk to you next time. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment. We said dos vidania to Strachnia. She is gone now, so we can talk about her in different ways. We will get the information from her. I love Russians. Like, I just love the Russian accent. It just cracks me up.
hey, you're bringing me back to my Bullwinkle days here with your
Rocky
accent.
and Bullwinkle. That's right. That was
Boris
about
Bednov and Natasha.
Russians. And they finally.
And what's
invaded Ukraine.
Natasha's last name? It's talking about trivia since it's the bonus. Do you know Natasha, Boris, and Natasha?
No, what is it?
Natasha Fatale. It's Natasha Fatale.
Like femme fatale.
Yeah. So
I like
did
that.
not see me look anything up for that
Yeah.
one. I know that
Yeah.
one.
Looked into
Trivia
your
Pursuit
brain.
days.
It was you are a walking, talking large language model.
I've certainly hallucinated, given my Berkeley background.
That's pretty funny. I like that. Well, speaking of hallucinations, I mean, goodness gracious, we do have to get down to business here and get serious about these AI models. And this is my prediction that every major corporation is going to have their own AI model. Many of them are working on it already. A lot of them aren't. In fact, you'll probably have multiple models, right? You have multiple data warehouses. And I get back to, is anything not in the crosshairs here? I'll throw it first to Scott and then over to Malcolm. You know, if you launch one of your own models, your private single instance, if you will, single tenant AI model, and start feeding it with your data, you're going to be able to get interesting stuff from that. And from a senior executive standpoint, you'd be able to ask, who's working on this right now? It's just going to pull this stuff in. It's kind of crazy how well it works. I don't fully understand it. I don't think anyone does. But Scott, I'll throw it over to you. I really think that every last bit of legacy technology is to some extent in the crosshairs now. What do you think?
God, don't you hope so? Everybody complains about so much of this stuff. You hope that it gets transformed in a way. Meanwhile, more than, half the world, if not more, is still tied to Excel and things like that, where they got to go kind of do their own little skunk works.
Right.
But, I hear about it. What I kind of want to remind people of is all this stuff's cool, but how's it driving the business? Regardless, how is this enabling the strategic intentions of your enterprise? How is it helping your company get to where it needs to go? And that's still the nature of business, right? Human interaction, bringing value to your relationships through your brands at some form of scale.
Right.
That still has to happen.
Right.
And I think, Malcolm was talking about coders. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, right? That they were saying, okay, what you got to do, everybody's got to learn to code. And now it's, that's the equivalent of we all have to learn how to use a slide rule. So just, having the creative aspects, and what I would counsel anybody going into the space is make sure you beef up your creativity capabilities there, because that is going to be tough to replace.
Yeah.
You hope, despite what's going on in Hollywood and the, discussions and during the strike about the use of AI and that sort of thing. It seems to be okay to tell a kind of mediocre story, but it hasn't come up with great stories yet, has it?
Yeah, I don't know, man. This is interesting. Malcolm, I'll throw it over to you. You've been tracking this industry for a long time. There are countless inefficiencies in how we manage data, how we move data, what we do with data. I think these new models, these new AI models, are going to be truly revolutionary in terms of information persistence and retrieval, but we do have to be careful because they do make stuff up. So how do you build an epistemological barrier into these things? I don't know. Do you have any ideas, Malcolm?
I'm not sure, but I think one of the things that we're going to have that is a bit difficult to conceive of is that it's going to replace legacy. I mean, what we have is an accumulating layer after layer after layer of legacy technology. There's going to be a new one on top of that. It's kind of the law of primitive survivals. You've still got, I looked at jobs for COBOL programmers on LinkedIn a couple of days ago. You've got people, still writing COBOL. and it's not necessarily going away. So we're getting this layered architecture built up with these things on top of it, which is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. It's not like we've had this before. A new generation of technology is supposed to replace everything else. It doesn't. It just becomes another layer. Look, what's happened to Hadoop? That's legacy now. So I think that's part of it. The other part is this is different in some ways. It addresses a different set of use cases. And as what Scott was saying in terms of the value it brings, I don't know. But I think it's like one of these moments where everybody's paralyzed with fear again, that if their competitor gets hold of this thing and does something with it, they're going to be driven out of business. So we got to do something too. And we'll spend money on it up until the point where we've disproven the technology, that it isn't a threat to us. Okay, like, the bricks and mortar crowd then, if you remember, rebelled against the dot-com people back in the early 2000s once the dot-com bubble burst, and they took a pretty terrible revenge on them. Now everything's matured since then, but it kind of feels a little bit to me like that again.
Well, everything's got a label now, right? Slapped on it. Now with Gen AI, it's just like, now with extra zest, it just becomes this productization for a lot of these technology companies. They rip the data mesh label off their POCs and put Gen AI on it because that's the hottest thing now. So it's hard not to be cynical about some of this stuff if you've been in the space for long enough.
Wow. What a fantastic show here, folks. If you want to be on the show, send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.